Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here today, my friends, on this Good Friday. Good Friday. We'll talk about Easter Sunday in the program today. We'll talk about Trump's speech. I told you yesterday I hadn't had time to listen to or review his speech prior to yesterday's program. I have listened to his speech. I want to go through that today, and we're going to talk about those things, and I am excited and glad that you are here. If you want the full story, if you want the background articles, the other things that we have to say about these things that we do not have time for during this program, you can text the word truth to 317-785-1030. You will get the daily, the inner circle sent to you daily with those things and more, my friends. Again, text truth to 317-785-1030. Okay, so I want to start with Trump's speech. And actually, if you listen to the speech, you'll know that at the beginning of the speech, he actually referenced something else that happened on Wednesday, which was the launch of Artemis 2. And I actually want to start there. Just really briefly, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I know that there are people undoubtedly in this audience who are people who believe in flat Earth. And I just want to share some thoughts on this really briefly, and then we'll talk about the rest of Trump's speech and then get to Good Friday, Easter, and all that. Which, again, I've told you that my favorite episode of the year is the day before Thanksgiving. But actually, this is close for me to talk about the... obviously, this is the most important... Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, is the most important day in the history of humanity. And that is no over-exaggeration. This is the single most important event in the history of humanity, the history of the world, the history of the universe, may I say that, my friends? So this, I love doing the story of Thanksgiving, and of course, there's an element that's tied to the gratitude ultimately being given to our Creator. But this is one of those days for me that's special as well, and I hope it is for you too, my friends. Here's a question for you, though, before we get started. Do you know where your money goes after you spend it? If that answer makes you cringe, it's time to check out Freedom Marketplace. Freedom Marketplace is a platform that we have built to connect conservatives like you with businesses who share your values, businesses that refuse to support leftist candidates and causes. It is free for you to use, and it's about keeping your dollars aligned with your values and principles. FreedomMarketplace.net is where you can go to check it out. Again, FreedomMarketplace.net, liberty and business for all, my friends. Okay, let's start. Let's start by talking about Artemis 2. It launched on April Fool's Day, April 1st, which that's a whole other discussion that I don't want to get into today with April Fool's Day. But nonetheless, the Artemis 2 is a manned, it's got a crew, it's a lunar rocket, and it is headed to orbit the moon. It's supposed to be about a 10-day mission, and it's the first humans to fly beyond low Earth orbit since the Apollo missions. Now, as I was reading this or listening to Trump reference it, and I thought about this just a little bit, it just struck me, because I know there's people out there that I love, consider myself friends with, who believe in flat Earth. And I wonder I wonder if they think Trump's just making all this up. They believe that this really is. I guess that's what they're going to believe. This is not really happening. This is spring break here for this particular area. Many people are in the spring break, just getting back from spring break or preparing to go on spring break for the elementary, junior high, and high school students. And if you have kids in that age group, many folks, especially from this part of the country, end up on the Florida beaches. I had a friend who was in Jacksonville, or one of the beaches in that area anyway, and they watched the launch of Artemis 2. Got some really good footage, and that's not close. I think he told me that. I mean, that's still a ways north of there, a couple hours anyway. See if he told me how many miles north they are. Can't find it, but it's not close. It's a little ways down, but there's great footage of this thing. And what do they think's happening here? Well, I know, and listen, I'm sympathetic in one sense here to people who believe in a flat earth. I'm sympathetic to the idea that we are lied to by our government. That I can agree with. And I do also know that many flat earthers come to, and I don't use that as a derogatory term. I'm not trying to put people, that's just the term I'm going to use here to describe these. I wonder what they think is going on here. And they'll cite the Bible, which of course I believe in the Bible. I believe that the Bible is the holy inspired word of God, and that it is true. I also believe that within the Bible, there are different types of literature. Actually, I know this to be the case. There's historical narrative, there's prophecy, there are books like Psalms and Proverbs. So there's all different types. The book of Job, different types, personal letters from Paul to churches. There's all sorts of types of different books in the Bible. The Bible, by the way, we talk about it as though it's one book. It's actually 66 separate books, 27 books in the New Testament, or epistles, letters, a narrative or a historical account of the life of Christ, which you'll find in the Gospels. In the Old Testament, there's 39 books, history of the kings and history of how the people of Israel were formed, how they were called by God through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all that, the whole story, the Exodus, which matters here on Easter, of course, as well. Today's Good Friday. And I know that there's a sincere faith here because they'll read verses like Isaiah 11:12, which talk about the four corners of the earth. There's lots of places, by the way, where there is four corners of the earth speak, and they say, listen, that means that it's flat. It's got to be a flat thing because a globe doesn't have four corners. A globe, of course, is a sphere. It's a ball. And by the way, you can't be upside down on a ball. You'll fall off of it. And that's, again, kind of the starting point. And there's other verses that they talk about as well. Psalm 22:7, talking about the ends of the earth. Psalm 104:5, talking how the earth cannot be moved. By the way, the earth cannot be moved. It doesn't mean that it doesn't move. It means that it can't be moved by anything that God didn't. God's the one that's going to move it. We can't. This is one of my beefs, one of my core beefs with the climate change movement. Rush used to say we couldn't destroy the earth if we tried. Now, you can destroy a lot of things, right? There's been people who have wreaked havoc on this planet, destroying people and families and communities. Normally, sometimes through war, oftentimes through big government and tyranny, doing their best to destroy liberty and prosperity and so forth. But the idea that we actually, it's an arrogant position to think that we can actually break God's created design. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, locally that there can't be problems of people polluting waterways and that sort of thing. But the idea that we can destroy it is pretty arrogant. It's right up there with, it's the sort of thing that I think Lucifer would have run with as well. But there's a lot of verses that people will cite, talking about the sun rises and sets. Of course, the Earth, the globe model, the heliocentric model is the Earth revolving around the sun. So the concept of the sun rising and setting, it's really the Earth moving or rotating, if you will. So there's, all of these things. The book of Joshua talks about the sun standing still for a period of time. And so there's verses here that I think well-meaning people, I just think that they misapply them and misunderstand. Now, I think that their hearts are many times in the right place, and I think that they're right for wanting to question or to be skeptical of what they're being told by government. Listen, government lies to us, and they have lied to us for a long time. I'm on the same page with you as far as that goes. The question is, just because they lie to us about everything, why do we assume that they're totally omnipotent, that they're all powerful, that they can do whatever it is they set up or set out to do? See, that's part of what my problem is with some of these things, is that the people running government, sure, they are deceitful. They'll lie to us. It's human nature. We've talked about human nature on this program recently. So I get the idea that these folks want to deceive us, want to empower themselves, enrich themselves. I get it. That's, again, human nature. But we also give them too much power. We act as though anything they set their mind to, they're capable of pulling off. And that's where I have a major disagreement. So just because they would lie to us about these things, it doesn't mean that they have the capacity to create a conspiracy, a global conspiracy, and then hide the truth from us for reasons I don't really even know. Some people say it's because this will cause people not to believe in God. By the way, the Bible is not a science textbook. It is a book about the story of humanity's relationship with God and how God has restored that through Christ, which we'll get to at the end of this, I'll call it a sermon, but end of this program today, my friends. And so people take these verses and well-meaning things and some other observations, and they'll talk about how the horizon looks flat. There's no visible curvature. They'll say things like water finds its level. Flight paths don't match a globe, although I would beg to differ on that. Anyway, there's also for me, I'm a common sense kind of guy. That's the starting point for me. I think these intellectual discussions are useful, but I also just think, and I love sunsets. In fact, I'll be honest with you. Where I live, which is in central Indiana, I'm telling you, I don't mean to say I've been around the world, but I've been to lots of places where the sunsets are very pretty. But I have to tell you, it is very hard, in my opinion, to beat the sunsets in this particular area. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but especially at fall time when they're harvesting the crops and there's just some of the dust from the activities in the field that's in the air. It's really beautiful. The silhouettes of tractors, the colors of the sky. It's beautiful. And I watch the sunset. I'm kind of a dork when it comes to this stuff, if you want to say that. It's harder to where I am to see to the east with the sunrise because there's trees and just a little bit different. But you go look to the west, it's as flat as a pancake here. And that allows us to see the sunset. And the idea that people really believe that that the sun is not passing beneath the horizon, but instead hitting a vanishing point is wild to me. I've watched this many, many times. That's simply not what happens. We've all been at the beach and watched maybe a ship set sail, a tanker, whatever, and you can see that the bottom disappears first. If you get into elevation, you can see farther out across what would be the horizon. at another level. In fact, they've done experiments, right, where they go to these skyscrapers and they'll put somebody at ground level, somebody on the 10th floor, someone on the 30th floor of buildings, and they're supposed to press a button or, ring a bell or some such thing whenever the sun gets behind the horizon completely. And it happens exactly as you would expect it to happen. The person at the ground level hits the button, rings the bell first. The person at the next higher level sees it pass behind the horizon second. And the person who has the highest vantage point sees it longer than the other two because, again, of the curvature of the Earth. Now, by the way, I'm also a nerd when it comes to flight. I have a love-hate relationship with flying. I think it's fascinating. I love it in one sense, but sometimes I'm not the world's best the best flyer. But I will tell you this. I get on flight radar. My son wants to be a pilot. It's something we talk about. And I will tell you, there's a flight from multiple flights from Santiago, Chile to Melbourne, Australia, or other places in Australia. And you should see the path that it takes. It would make absolutely zero sense on the flat Earth model. Not to mention, what's the scale of Australia on the flat Earth model? There's a lot of things, a lot of questions that I have. But I bring this up only because Trump mentioned this at the beginning of his speech. As he's going out there, you know how Trump does it, right? He says, listen, just wanted to talk about some big news, one of the greatest feats in the history of space exploration. Never been anything like it. We're sending, just a couple hours ago, we had a rocket take off, and that thing's going to circumnavigate, or I guess go around the dark side of the moon and go on a mission here. That's something that only we can do, right? We're leading the way with space exploration, which matters, by the way, even in some of these global conflicts that we're talking about, especially with Iran. Having dominance in space absolutely impacts having dominance on planet Earth as well. So I want to talk briefly about Trump's speech. So that was, again, just some thoughts I had. I know that some of you are into this. I believe the Earth is a globe. I see nothing biblically that contradicts anything like that. I know some people disagree with that. I don't even think it's close, to be honest with you. But I respect people for their opinions, especially convictions that are sincerely held and so forth. But I wondered as I listened to him talk about that, and I've reflected on that, what do people think is happening here? Is Trump lying about Artemis too? What's that all about? I wonder what the flat Earth community. You can tell me, by the way. You're welcome to tell me. Text me, 317-785-1030, and share your thoughts and opinions and all that. So, friends, you've worked hard, you've made smart choices. Now it's all about making sure that effort counts, not just for today, but for the future. Full Suite Wealth helps forward-thinking people with a coordinated approach to wealth, legacy, and legal planning, including private equity, private credit, and options strategies. They'll help you see the big picture, plan ahead, and make your success truly matter for the people you care about most. The goal is to get you a plan that stands the test of time. Visit FullSuiteWealth.com. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy. Secure your future. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit here, more into the main portion of Trump's speech about Iran. Trump, of course, talked about the facts, which is the United States carried out strikes on Iran-linked targets that were tied back to Iran-backed groups. So there's this, of course, this whole notion of proxy war, which we've talked about here, right? Iran is an evil, not the people, the government, the people running the show. It is an evil empire. And they have been waging war on the United States, whether we want to fully admit that or not, through proxies, sometimes through other more direct means. Trump listed some of those during his speech. And Trump said, no more. No more. We're not going to put up with this. We've been threatened enough by these bullies and knuckleheads and clowns. Iran is responsible for working through these proxies. Trump talked about having no choice but to act, and the purpose of the action was to protect American lives, saying that the attacks that have happened on Americans, that have actually happened, that could happen, and of course, almost certainly would happen even more so if Iran was allowed to get a nuclear weapon. Trump says this is absolutely not going to be tolerated under his administration. In fact, he referenced how this has been swept under the rug, or the can kicked down the road by previous administrations. He, of course, doubled down on the idea that Iran was supporting, funding, providing weapons to these proxy groups. They have an ongoing pattern of aggression. They are a destabilizing presence in the Middle East. And, of course, their impact is felt around the world, especially when you factor in global markets. Trump said the purpose of these attacks was to stop further attacks, to protect Americans, to restore deterrence, protect our allies in the region. I mean, this is a lot of stuff that you've heard me say on this program. I could have just come on here and played some sound bites from the speech and said, yep, you heard that here before, my friends. But no, just talking about this in context, because this matters. And this sort of thing matters when if you go into the office, if you go into your classroom, you're with your teachers, and you debate these issues. These things matter. These things matter, and having a proper understanding of these geopolitical events and the threats that we actually face around the world, having information and some, a little bit of firepower to your argument's a good thing. And so Trump laid out the case. And he says, that, of course, these strikes were successful. It's very decisive, very powerful response. There's never been anything. I love Trump doing this, by the way. This really upsets the left. There's never been anything like it before. Most decisive military campaign in the history of military campaigns. These are the sorts of things Trump was saying up there. And listen, it has been incredibly successful. Trump said Iran better not retaliate. If they do, we will respond. We're not putting up with this. We're not playing games. The time of Iran creating instability and havoc around the world is over. It's coming to an end. We're not going to stand for it, especially when you've been attacking and killing Americans, and also you're pursuing nuclear weapons. Time out. That's what I've got to do, my friends. Take a quick time out. You're listening here to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, the one, the only Todd Huff. We'll be back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Going through Trump's speech about Iran. Going through it, again, just talking about the high points, the generalization of what his argument was, what he's trying to communicate, what's next in this conflict. We talked first, the last segment, about his opening comments about Artemis 2 being launched, and I raised the question, what do people who believe in flat Earth think about that? And I don't mean that to be provocative. I'm one who believes in, there's a globe. But listen, I'm not here to make enemies. I was just curious when I heard Trump start with that part of the speech. It just got me to thinking, because I got to be honest with you. Listen, there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know that I assumed it was just another rocket launch. I wasn't until recently that I realized, there's going to be people on this one. So anyway, that's what we talked about last segment. And by the way, if you want to hear the full story, if you're not able to listen to the full podcast, the show here, text the word truth, 317-785-1030, and you'll get all the information, links, ways to listen to things you missed, other content that we create that we don't have time to get to on the program. Just text truth to 317-785-1030. Okay. So, Trump has made it clear that the intention here is not to engage in a full-scale war. He's talked about this. And again, this has been consistent. If you account for, again, we reference Sun Tzu's The Art of War on this program. If you account for Trump being strategic and his strategery when dealing with his military foes on the world stage. I mean, Trump is talking about there's 50,000, I think it was 50,000 troops in the region. And so Trump has talked about those things. He's said he's going to do whatever it takes. He's not ruling out anything. And by the way, that's what you want to do. It's what you want to do when you are, well, trying to manage conflict and bring it to a conclusion as quickly as possible. You don't want to give your opponents clues and a plan. This is what we're going to do next week. Instead, you want to keep them guessing, to have the element of surprise, keep them never really sure what's going to happen next, other than the fact we're not putting up with the nonsense any longer. We're done with that. But Trump has made it clear that his intentions are not to do those things. And of course, Trump says it's decisive, it's powerful, it's everything that you would expect it to be. President Trump, of course, doing what President Trump does in those moments, in those speeches, says that it's incredibly successful, we're very strong, very capable, overwhelmingly effective. Never been anything like it talk was repeated multiple times in this speech. Now, there's critics, of course, there's always critics. And listen, I think that, there should be people who are criticizing things. It's how we have meaningful conversations politically. It's how we prevent ourselves, hopefully, if we're truly looking for answers to these concerns, it's how we actually hold people accountable, or at least it's a part of it. So a lot of people say that they don't buy Trump's argument saying he had no choice. Critics say you still have a decision. And framing it as an inevitable war, they would argue, removes accountability for yourself. I understand where that argument comes from, but I also understand the amount of naivete toward Iran and their ambitions and their desire to inflict evil on the United States, on Israel, on the region, their desire to have a worldwide, or at least a regional caliphate, but a global caliphate. They want to force people into their brand of political Islam. That's what they want to do. But there's some people out there that say you can't, you always have a choice. And I suppose that's the case. But the choice at this point was allow madmen to have nuclear weapons when they've shown us that they're prepared to kill our troops through IEDs, when they're prepared to engage in proxy wars through groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and so forth. The choice was, do we allow these people to get a nuclear weapon, or do we strike before they have the capability? Because suddenly the world changes if Iran has that type of weaponry. So, some people question what exactly triggered the strike in Iran, how direct Iran's role has been, especially when it comes to these proxy groups and so forth, what intelligence actually was there to show that this was immediately necessary. Trump didn't really share any of that, and I don't know that he should have. Some of these questions I think are fair, but I also think that there are answers that are out there that are equally as fair and reasonable. So I don't, again, put too much stake in that. Some people aren't buying that Iran is really involved in these proxy wars as much as Trump and the administration are saying they are. Of course, that's what Iran wants. This is the whole point of having proxy groups, is to have some level of plausible deniability. Some critics out there say that they do have this plausible deniability. We can't even really say for certain how much Iran is involved. But then again, if you look at some of these attacks, especially when you look at the IED as it was used in Iraq and Afghanistan against our military personnel, our troops, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that this could be traced back, at least a lot of this stuff could be traced back to, Soleimani and the Iranians, who, of course, Soleimani is no more. Some people, of course, are just afraid of this escalating, which is really interesting to me, to think that you look at the United States as the one who's the accelerant that's going to escalate this. And to me, I look at this and think, what are you paying attention to? Why do you give the enemy all the benefit of the doubt, all of the basically free passes to just do whatever they want when it comes to nuclear programs, proxy warfare, violating other terms of deals that have been out there that they're supposed to be following and so forth. And the United States can't do anything no matter what happens, but we always excuse the behavior of the Iranians. You can't tell me. I understand that that's kind of it's either a pacifist or, dare I say, a cowardly position because you're kicking the can down the road. You have to be realistic here and realize that if these people are acting this way without a nuclear weapon, imagine how much more terrorizing or out of control they would be with a nuclear weapon. And then, of course, there's the debate over war powers, which we've talked about on this program as well. But I think a lot of this, and you've heard me talk about this quote from Selena Zito. She wrote this in The Atlantic. I talk about this on this program regularly because I think it's brilliant, to be honest. She says, the press takes him literally, not seriously. His supporters take him seriously, but not literally. And I think that sums up so much. If you understand that comment, I think you're well on your way to understanding Trump, the connection he has with his most supportive parts of the base, and just this political battle that we find ourselves in. I think that if you understand that statement, again, the press takes Trump literally, not seriously. His supporters take him seriously, not literally. So I'm going to take a break here as I look at the clock. That's just summarizing. Again, I was in agreement, nodding in agreement. This speech was, 17 or 18 minutes long. I listened to the whole thing and was nodding in agreement the whole time. I chuckled a few times, especially when he talked about, again, this is the best whatever in the history of the world sort of thing. I love that talk because I just know it makes these leftists' heads explode just for reasons that that are kind of encapsulated in that quote that I just read. So when we get back, I want to quickly share with you a special message here on Good Friday as we head into Easter weekend. So we'll do that on the other side, my friends, of the break. By the way, before we take that break, if you're curious, you've heard me talk about Kratom on this program. If you're curious about that, you want honest answers before you buy anything, if you're just doing your research, you're invited to weekly tea talk from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. Happens every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. No pressure, no sales pitch, just conversation with real people who want to help you understand Kratom, what it is, how it's used, how to stay safe, what to avoid. So education, Christopher's Organic Botanicals believes, is very important here. Be educated about the product, and that's what sets them apart. There's too many people that are shady sellers who are just interested in forcing product on you, especially when you're not ready and you don't know the quality that they're providing. Christopher's is here to help you learn first and then make decisions for yourself. You can join the conversation Thursdays at 7. For more information, visit Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. And yes, time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Friends, you know, one of the biggest challenges we have as conservatives is finding ways to ensure our values align with everything we do. And I'm not saying to be just obsessed about this. I'm just saying, look, there comes a time when you realize I want to quit funding things that go against my values. I want to stop funding abortion. I want to stop funding the LGBTQIA plus movement. I want to stop funding the people that hate Jaden Ivey, who we talked about earlier in the week, my friends. And you can do that. You can do that by learning more about your investments, doing a quick and easy assessment to see to what degree those investments line up with your values. You can take that assessment at 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial specializes in biblically responsible investing. And I think that matters. I think you should consider seeing how they can help you get a handle on these things. 48financial.com/Todd. Okay. So I mentioned this is Good Friday. So Easter Sunday. Easter is this Sunday. Now, I know the vast majority of you know what happened on these days. This is the Holy Week. But for those of you who don't, I'm going to give you a very quick synopsis. Very quick synopsis. God created the world to be perfect, and we lived in perfection for some time until Adam and Eve decided to rebel against God. And sin entered the world, and all sort of chaos came as a result of that. And the biggest part of that chaos was that humanity, all people would experience death, physical death and spiritual death. And so God loved humanity. God loved humanity, and his desire was to find a way to bridge the gap back to himself, back to how it was, so to speak, with the intimacy he had with Adam and Eve in the garden. And so he started first in the Old Testament a sacrificial system. And there's a whole narrative and a whole story. In fact, there's a guy named Moses, if you're not familiar with the Bible, who led the people out of Egypt and celebrated later, a year later, they celebrated that Passover, the Passover meal, when God passed over. God passed over the homes that had the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. This was done when they were in Egypt. It was the last of the 12 plagues. Immediately after this, Pharaoh told Moses to go. This is where the Red Sea happened and all that. So you have a people that God had promised to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, the sands on the seashore. And so that people ends up in Israel. But the system, while there certainly was, of course, the sacrificial system that was established first in the tabernacle, that they kind of a mobile sanctuary or temple of sorts, and then eventually a permanent temple where they would actually gather for religious events, and of course the Day of Atonement, where the sacrificial lamb, the annual sacrifice, was given for the forgiveness of sins. And that's the celebration. The Passover celebration was what was happening when Jesus was crucified. So Jesus and his disciples, fast forward these thousands of years later, Jesus and his disciples were celebrating the Passover meal. That's what the Last Supper is. And if you've never done a Seder meal, which is the actual celebration, the Passover meal, it is an absolutely amazing thing to do, especially as a Christian. It is so fascinating to see and understand how this is viewed, especially through the lens of Judaism and Old Testament Judaism and how they practice this. And so Jesus, during that meal, it's fascinating. I can't go into it, but he holds up the bread and the wine. This is where he says, "This is my body, which was given for you. This is my blood, which was shed so that you could have forgiveness of sin." This is when this happened. And immediately after that, he was taken. He was taken because he was betrayed by Judas, one of the 12. He was taken prisoner. He was falsely accused by Jewish leaders, and he was crucified. He was crucified, it's believed, on Friday because they had to get his body off the cross for the Sabbath, although there is some people who believe it was before that because there's a different type of Sabbath that's associated with the Passover. I'm not educated enough on that to talk much about it, but I am just here to say that it was this weekend. And so as the story in the Bible goes, Jesus was placed, he died upon the cross, he was placed in a tomb, and when the women went to prepare the body for the final resting, because they didn't have time to do it before they put him behind the stone and sealed it, they were afraid, by the way, that the disciples or somebody were going to steal Jesus' body, so they put guards out there, they sealed the tomb and all this. The women showed up on Sunday morning, and there's angels there, and they say, he is risen. He's not here. You're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, the Christ. He's not here. He is risen, and he is risen indeed. Friends, the Bible says that whosoever believes will have eternal life. That applies to you. I don't care today, you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. It doesn't matter. Jesus died for you. I hope you have a happy Easter, my friends. SDG.